You know, it's funny when me, Jacqueline, and Gilbert were prepping the schedule for who's going to preach what week this month. I actually was so excited to see that this week was open. You know, because not only was it the first week, it's always nice to preach the first week of the month, but it's also because the date is really funny, 6/7. It's June 7th. So I'm really excited to be up here. So I hope you guys are too. All right. Anyways, enough about that. I kind of want to talk to you guys about what's been going on in my life recently. I feel like I haven't done a life update up here recently. I talk about things that happened in the past that have already moved on. I've moved on from, right? But I want to give you guys an update so you guys know what's going on with me. So first things first, I'm wearing contacts. If you guys can see. Yeah, my eyes are kind of itchy right now, so if I keep blinking like this, just ignore me, okay? Because my eyes are getting used to it again, so it's it's a learning process for me. Other thing, I got engaged. Yeah. Yeah, I know, right? How did this guy get engaged? I know. Yeah, I recently got engaged a couple days, not a couple days ago, 2 weeks ago, I believe. Where is she? I don't know where she is. Oh, hey. The girl that's in blue, that's the person that somehow wanted to marry me. Yeah, we got engaged. And let me tell you guys, proposing to somebody is not easy, bro. Bro, it's a lot. It's kind of stressful, I'm not going to lie, because, after you get the ring, right? When I picked up the ring in my hands, and I looked at it, I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm literally about to move on to a whole new stage of life. I'm about to commit myself to somebody for the rest of my life, And it sounds nice, right? Maybe for you guys right now, it sounds like, oh, that sounds so much fun, and I want to be able to have a person like that too. I'm telling you, as someone who's moved past it, it's kind of scary, It's easy to think about it then, but when it's right there in front of your face, it scares you. At least it scared me a lot, because it was never that I didn't want to be with her for the rest of my life, right? It's not that there was nothing wrong with her, but it was kind of more so oh man, am I good enough to be able to move on like this? To be able to take care of us, right? To be able to provide for our family, right? Because we're not just going to get married, we're going to have children, right? Hopefully. And we're going to have an actual real family, right? And it's a big decision. It's a big thing, And I was worried about it for a little bit, It really gave me a lot of anxiety and just concern and worry, But I'm kind of glad it's passed now. I'm glad she said yeah. Dude, I thought she would say no. I'm not gonna lie. I low-key thought she would say nah, But she said yes, and yeah, surprisingly, and we're finally ready to move on to the next stage of life. It really feels like yesterday that I was a bad little kid running around here, causing a mess, annoying the adults that are here, and now I'm literally about to live the rest of my life with her. It's a crazy thing, right? The topic of love has been a repeating theme in my life. Besides my own romantic relationship, right? I feel like the Lord has been moving me to take a deeper look into the way I love my friends, my community, my family, right? And I've been reading about it recently too. I've been trying to actually read more books, listen to more podcasts, actually try to pour into myself and learn more about how to love more the way that Jesus does, right? And everyone here obviously knows what love is, right? It's not a new thing or anything like that, right? We talk about it all the time here, right? But today I want to share with you guys some of the things that I've learned about recently when it comes to learning how to love people well, right? And I hope that today that the things that I'm going to be talking about today, hopefully they can help you too. Help you guys learn how to love better, how to love more well too, okay? So if we can pull up the title for my message today, the title of my message is A Developed Love. Can everyone say a developed love? And simply put, today, the goal that I have for today, for this message, is that I want to help you all do just that. I want to help you develop your love, right? I want to help you guys learn how to love people in a more meaningful way, in a more effective way, in a more stronger way, okay? So if you can pull up 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 to 11, what does it say? It says, "Dear friends, let us love one another because love is from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God because God is love." Amen. God's love was revealed among us in this way. God sent his one and only Son into the world so that we might live through him. Love consists in this, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, if God loved us in this way, we also must love one another. Right? In order to develop our love, right, we need to the best way to develop our love is to imitate the one who is the full definition of love, right? Biblical, when we talk about biblical love, right, love that is based on the Bible, it is love that is based on how God acted, how Jesus acted, right? So, when we talk about wanting to develop our love and want to be better in that, we need to look at the person who acted out love perfectly, which is Jesus, right? So that's the question we're going to be talking about today, right? How do we love well, right? Simply put, right? So, I'm going to be talking about some things today, and I hope that, again, I hope it can help you guys, okay? So what's the first way? The first way we can learn to love well, love more better, is that we need to learn how to love thoughtfully. Can everyone say thoughtfully? First and foremost, we are called to be thoughtful in the way that we love, right? Both to God and to his people, right? When we talk about biblical love, right? Biblical love was never meant to be accidental. It was never meant to be spontaneous or just, it just happened, right? But biblical love was always meant to be enacted with intention. Can everyone say intention? Right? Can we pull up 1 Peter verse 1 to 22? Right? What does it say? It says, "Since you have purified yourselves by your obedience to the truth, so that you show sincere brotherly love for each other from a pure heart, love one another constantly." Right? Peter says here that if you want to talk about loving thoughtfully, loving intentionally, it talks about you need to have the love from a pure heart. It comes from your soul, your being, right? So in order to love God and love his people thoughtfully, right, we need two things, right? First, we need to know who we are trying to love, but we also need to have these acts of love stem from a loving heart posture, right? One of the most common ways to love somebody well that most people know, right, is to pay attention to people, right? Learn about the things that make people happy, right? Maybe a certain someone you care about loves spending quality time with you, right? Maybe they love when you remember or celebrate their birthdays, right? Or other special days, right? Maybe they love when you always check up on them and, make sure that they're okay, right? There's always certain things that people just when you do that for them, it makes them feel extra special, extra loved, right? You guys ever hear the phrase, "if he wanted to, he would," right? Or "if she wanted to, she would," right? It's a classic phrase that high school/college kids say a lot. I hear it all the time, right? If they wanted to hang out with you more, they would ask to, right? If they wanted to talk to you more, they would, right? If they wanted to show how much they love you, they would, right? It's used in a lot of situations, right? For people's friendships, but also people's romantic relationships, right? And, for Cecile and I, right, it actually came up a couple times in our relationship too, right? One example that I want to talk to you guys about was about the topic of communication, right? So I'll give you guys some lore about us, right? So before her and I started dating, we used to text all the time, right? 24/7. I'm talking essay chunks, right? Bro, it's literally like we would talk about our entire day play by play. I'm not even joking, right? We would talk about how our day went, right? How much we hate school, our professors, our homework, church stuff, whatever, right? I literally felt like I was at war, like a soldier writing home to my wife. That's how I felt. Just writing about everything, right? I can tell you that, I'm not gonna lie, the reason why I don't remember a lot about my classes is because I was probably texting her back, bro. I'll be honest, right? But after we started dating, right? After we started dating, we low-key stopped texting as much, right? We didn't stop texting completely, right? But it kind of died down a little bit, right? And one day, Cecile sat me down and she asked me why, right? Why are you texting me back less, right? Why are you like not saying your whole like letter like you used to, right? It was like bothering her, right? She started to like doubt whether or not I enjoyed talking to her, right? Because her, like, she loves to text, right? Like, well, me at least, right? And she always wanted to talk to me over text, right? She wanted to know what I was up to. She wanted to tell me about how her day was going, right? And when she asked me this, I honestly didn't know why. I didn't have an answer, right? And I didn't really know why. But when I checked my text and I looked back at our history, I was like, wow, like I actually don't really say that much anymore. Nowadays, instead of texting whole like letters, I kind of just say, oh, nothing much. How about you? Type, And I tried to look inward too, right? Because it's not like I didn't like her anymore, or it's not like I got bored of her. That was not the case. I still liked her and had feelings for her. But I think that what happened was that I think the Holy Spirit, I prayed about it, and I think the Holy Spirit helped me understand what changed, right? So some further lore, right? Before her and I got together too, her boundary with boys has always been that she never wanted to hang out one-on-one with other dudes, right? That was always her thing, for whatever reason. And so because of that, her and I, when we were talking, like getting to know each other and stuff like that, we never really hung out, right? Usually if you want to get to know someone, you go out with them, right? Hey, you want to get lunch? You want to hang out after school? You want to study together? You want to do whatever? Bro, she said no to all that. She didn't want to do anything with me, right? Like the only time we would ever really talk was through texting, right? Or through FaceTime calls, or like the occasional gym session where Winston was third wheeling us, right? And, and it's funny, right? Oh, hey, Winston, what's up, bro? But anyways, right, I think what happened was that because we did that for so long, I started to I think my mind started to make the connection that texting was my only connection to her, like my real, landline to her, right? So I think that's why I built such an obsession. That's why I kept texting so much, right? But, after we started dating, obviously we started hanging out more often alone together, right? Going out to get lunch, dinner, whatever, right? So because of that, because we hung out finally, right? Maybe I was like, hey, you know what? Maybe I don't need to text as much anymore because I have other ways to connect with her, right? So, I realized that and I was like, you know what? You're right, Sil. I'm sorry, right? I'm sorry. I understand that it means a lot to you and I got to do better. I'll do better, right? I'll try to text you more because, you want me to text you more. And you know what she said, bro? She said to me, bro, she said, well, I don't want you to text me back if you don't want to text me back. I want you to text me back because you want to text me back. Not just because I asked you to, right? It's the if he wanted to, he would, right? I was like, bro, all right, bro. I was like, I said to her afterward that I said, Seal, it's not like I don't want to text you. Of course I want to text you, right? Of course I want to text you, right? I think it's just that I just tend to lean towards wanting to hang out with you in other ways, right? Wanting to spend time with you in other ways, right? But I said to her, right, but if you want me to text you more, I will. Not because just you asked me, but because I want to make you happy, right? I think people tend to misunderstand things in these kinds of situations, right? Because when you tell someone, right, that, oh, I wish you did this more, or I wish you didn't do that as much, or whatever, right? If the person that you said that to says, okay, I'll try to do better and do the thing you asked of me, that doesn't imply that they only are doing it because you asked them to, right? They're doing it to be thoughtful to you, right? To be intentional with you, right? I believe that when people try to respond as if, okay, I'll do better and I'll do what you asked of me, they are trying to love you thoughtfully with real effort, because even though that act might not be natural for them, it's okay that it's inconveniencing them because they want to love you well. They want to love you in the way that you want to be loved, right? And I tried my best to text more after that, right? I did try. It wasn't easy for me, low key, but I tried, right? And she said I was doing better. I hope. I hope that she meant that, right? And I do try to do better. I hope that because I want her to be happy too, right? And when it comes to talking about Jesus, bringing this back to the Bible, Jesus was always thoughtful in the way that he loved people. If you ever read about it, right? Because one of my favorite one of my favorite stories of Jesus is usually the times when he makes time to stop and talk to the homeless person, right? Or maybe he stops and sits with the sick person, and asks them, talks to them, right? Usually my favorite stories are the stories where Jesus goes and eats dinner with regular people, Because Jesus was so good at loving people with intention. He was so good at loving people because Jesus' heart was full of intentional love, right? Like I was talking about you earlier, right? The two things we need in order to love people thoughtfully is that we need to know the people we love, right? And we also need to have these actions of love stem from a loving heart, right? With a heart full of love. And Jesus was really good at that, right? Because not only did Jesus love people thoughtfully, he also knew just what the person needed, right? So when you're out there in the world, I want to encourage you today to choose to love people purposefully, right? I want you guys to go out there and learn how to love the people. I want you to learn how people want to be loved and love that way, even if it's hard, right? Even if it's like inconveniencing you, right? Because to be loved by someone is to be known by someone, amen? Right? So love God and love his people the same way he chose to love you, by wanting to get to know everything about you, okay? So that's the first thing, right? The first way we learn how to love well is to love thoughtfully. What's the second way? The second way we can learn to love more better, more well, is to also love boldly. Can everyone say boldly? Besides loving thoughtfully, right, another great way to love well is to love boldly, right? Jesus expressed his love boldly many times in the Bible, right? You know, whether he was preaching at like temples or pavilions or town centers, he was like in like the most like populated place of the town and just preaching the gospel, right? Every single day, right? Every single day he was having debates with Pharisees, with religious leaders, right? These open like public arguments about like the theology, about the gospel, you know? And like I mentioned earlier, Jesus would openly eat with sinners too, right? He wouldn't be like shy about it or try to hide it. Like, no, he would say, hey, like, for example, like Zacchaeus, if you guys remember that story, right? I want to eat at your house today, right? He said that out loud, you know? If you notice, right, every time Jesus chose to love somebody, not only thoughtfully, but Jesus also wanted to initiate these situations. Like, you know, Jesus always tried to put himself in these situations to love. Why? Because when you talk about loving boldly, to love boldly is to initiate love. Right? It's to create the opportunity to love, right? You don't just sit and wait for the moment to come to you. You make the moment happen, right? If we can look back to 1 John chapter 4, but specifically verses 10 to 11, right? What does it say? It says, love consists in this, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son, right, to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, if God loved us in this way, we also must love one another, right? By sending his son Jesus to die for our sins, God made the first step to initiate love for us, right? You know, God he opened up the opportunity for us to enter into a loving relationship with him, and he took the first step, right? You know, because when you talk about initiating opportunities to love, that is biblical. That comes from the Bible. That comes from the Trinity, you know? So as God held out his hand for us to be loved, we are called to hold out our hands so that people can be loved as well, okay? You know, when I was writing out this point, right, I wanted to find an example that could hopefully make this make more sense, right? Because I know it's kind of abstract, I understand, right? So, you know, when I was thinking about who to embarrass, right, I couldn't help but think about Sion, right? So, you know, Sion, you know, yes, you, right? So, you know, I don't think I ever told you this, right? But I'm not gonna lie, bro. I used to not like how nice you were, bro. I'm just gonna be honest, right? I'll put it out there, right? Even when we were kids, I low-key didn't like it, right? Because every time we saw each other, right? Every time Sion came into the room, if we ever made eye contact, Sion would always give me like the biggest hugs, bro. Like he would always give me like the crispiest dap-ups, you know, like it's like he would do the same thing every time, whether he just came back from like a long trip or I literally just saw him yesterday, bro. Like it's crazy. Like Sion has always been a very positive and optimistic dude, right? He's a very cheerful, like giddy person. Like you guys know that one meme of like the dumb smiling hamster with like the unicorn with like the sunshine and rainbows? That's literally him, bro. Like he's just like the whole world is sunshine and rainbows for this guy, bro. Like he's been like that for years, too. Ever since we were kids, he was just the same, you know? Sion is genuinely like the sweetest dude ever, and I low-key hated that, bro. It made me cringe, I'm not gonna lie, right? Because in my mind, in my mind, I thought like, bro, why do you have to make everything so sappy all the time? Like, why do you keep like bringing up all this emotional stuff, bro? Like, why do you keep doing that, right? You know, I thought like that for a long time. You know, I won't lie, right? But I guess I've been around you for too long, bro, because now I'm low-key just like you, right? Because as time went on, right, I started to begin to change, right? I started to begin to appreciate how much he loved people, right? Like the way he loved people, you know? Because Sion was always the type that he always was willing to love people openly, right? Unashamed, right? Unapologetically. You know, he was never ashamed to love people well, right? And like just like boldly, right? And because he loved so openly, so often, like never changing, you know, I think you actually kind of like you made me start to believe and subconsciously think that, you know, you'll always be around. You know, you would always stick around some way, somehow, right? And you know, I was always the kind of guy that wanted to love openly too, right? I'm a big lover dude, you know. I love loving people well, you know. But over the years, I became shy, right? I became scared that, you know, maybe people will reject me, that they won't want the love that I want to give, right? But you know, recently, Sion, I've started to realize that I've low-key been taking you for granted, bro. You know, because how good is it, right? How good does somebody have to be that they love you so well that you believe in your soul that they'll always love you like that, right? That they'll always, like they'll never change, right? That's the kind of love that usually parents give their kids, right? You know, now that I'm 23, right? I'm turning 24 this year, right? I realized, Sion, that I want to love the way you love, right? You know, because obviously he has ups and downs in his life too, right? I'm not saying he has a perfect life. He has a normal dude just like everybody else, right? But Jesus, no, he's not Jesus. But Sion has always loved this church so boldly. You know, he has always loved the people here so boldly, so openly. You know, he was never afraid to tell anyone how much he cared about them. You know, it's funny, right? When I thought about this too, I also thought about like an interview that I watched recently too. You know, it was like this person with like a celebrity. It was like at a carpet event or something, whatever, right? And this person asked this celebrity for, you know, just some advice. Like, hey, like my love life kind of sucks right now. Like, can you give me like a piece of advice on how to do better, right? And I really liked the guy's response. You know what he said? He said, you know, that the person who's in love always wins, right? That it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all, right? And I really like that. Right? And I think that saying can be tweaked like a little bit, right? It's not just the person who's in love always wins, but it's the person who loves that always wins. You know, if you think about it, right? The sun, right? The sun doesn't care whether or not the grass appreciates its rays, right? The sun just keeps on shining, right? So maybe we need to be like that too, right? And I think Sion, I think you embody that quality of love very well. You know, you've told me multiple times that, you know, I've done a lot for you and that you wish you could do the same for me. But I'm telling you, bro, like I believe you've changed my heart more than you know, because whether you know it or not, you've helped me learn how to love people more openly and not be ashamed. And I appreciate you for that. You know, I believe you love really well, you know, and I'm trying to do it just like you. So, you know, anyways, enough about that. That's the first two ways to love well, right? First, we need to learn how to love thoughtfully, right? Learn how to love boldly. And the third way that we need to learn how to love well is to love devotedly. Can everyone say devotedly? You know, I actually saved this point for last on purpose because this is the type of love that I've come to learn a lot about recently, you know? I think most people understand what devotion generally is, right? You know, it's the decision to commit to something, to someone, right? You know, but when I think about this love, you know, I think about the way that I love, right? And how much it's changed over the years, right? You know, since the beginning, right? Since the beginning, I've always tried to give my all for the people I love. You know, I tried my best, right? You know, I wanted to do all I could so that the people around me could feel safe with me, could feel like heard and seen by me so they could succeed in life, right? You know, and the years, like I've mentioned, they've flown by me, bro. Like I'm turning 24 soon. You know, it's crazy, right? And for me, being devoted to people and to God, right, was never really that hard for me. I've always been like an all or nothing kind of guy. That's just my nature, right? But I think my perspective on devotion has actually evolved significantly, a lot, right? The longer I've been around, the longer I've been alive, Starting off, as I'm growing up, right, as a teenager, right, I was so happy and eager to serve and pour into my community, right, however I could, right? But like all things, all situations, right, things happen, right? Disagreements come up, arguments come up, drama happens, beef happens, right? People hurt others, hurt me, I hurt others, people start, sneak dissing, spreading rumors, gossiping, all that stuff, like unable to forgive. There's like so many things that happen in life, not just in church, but like just in every corner of my life, And, before I knew it, right, it seemed like the messiness of the world finally invaded my slice of life, my corner of life, And, it changed me, like growing up, it definitely affected me, right? I became more sad, more bitter, more resentful, unvalued, jealous, petty, frustrated, all the things you could think of, right? For a really long time, it was really hard to show up for the people in my life, It was really hard to, just be there and be present, be available when people needed me, because I was really struggling with not receiving the love that I expected to receive, right? Because like in my mind, I'm thinking like, man, I've loved you guys for so long. Like I've loved you, this person, for so long. Like why don't you love me back? Why don't you love me where I need to be loved? Like I was like bitter about it, right? But there was something I learned that really shifted my perspective, and I want to share it with you guys. And I think this would really be helpful to you too. So if you could pull up Matthew 5:13, if you could pull it out, what does it say? It says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden." I'm going to warn you guys, I'm going to be a little bit more abstract, so I need you guys to lean in a little bit, okay? And just like kind of focus for this part, okay? So this verse is talking about being the salt of the earth, right? I'm sure you guys have heard this verse before, right? And usually the way I understood it, how I learned about it, right, is that to be the salt of the earth, it meant that we were called to be useful, right? We were called to, help and serve wherever we could, right? Because, the reason why salt is useful is because it makes food taste better, right? Or it like helps keep meat fresh, right? And like I told you, I tried to live that way, right? I tried to live my life serving people and helping however I could, right? But what if, right? What if being the salt of the earth didn't just mean being useful, but it also meant being present in the moments of pain, right? Salt is everywhere, right? If you think about it, right? Salt is a very common mineral in the world because not only is it used for food, but it's in your rocks, your mountains, your hills, your valleys, your oceans. It's everywhere, right? But something I've learned recently is that salt is not just in the obvious places in the world, right? But salt is also found in the more unknown places. For example, salt is actually found in the medicine that you guys use to treat your cuts and wounds, right? When you talk about a saline solution, things that you pour on your cuts, that has a concentration of salt, right? Salt is also found in the tears that you guys cry as it goes down your face, right? What if being the salt of the earth meant being in places where things were not yet whole, right? We know that salt is used to preserve meat, right? And, because it interrupts decay. It keeps the food from rotting, right? What if we were called to do the same, right? What if we're called as well to, when it comes to being the salt of the earth, what if that means being called to be in places where life is still trying to survive, right? So what am I trying to say, Ethan? You're making no sense. What am I saying, right? All I'm trying to say is being the salt of the earth means loving God and loving his people even when it hurts, right? Devoted love. When you talk about a devoted love towards somebody, towards something, towards a group of people, right? It's not supposed to disappear when things get hard, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be devotion anymore, right? Devoted love stays in the places of hurt. Devoted love loves even when it's not easy to, you know? Being the salt of the earth, it means being brave enough to be in the good and bad places of life. You know, the places that people tend to run away from. You know, it might hurt, right? I understand. It might sting to put yourself in those places where it hurts, where it's a soft spot, a sore wound, a wound that never fully healed in your life. You know, when you think about, maybe right now you guys might be thinking about your family life, your situation with your friends, your social life, your work life, maybe church life here at AGC, right? Whatever you're thinking about right now, I'm sure it hurts, right? I'm sure it hurts to think about the places where you feel like you've tried to show love, but you never received it back, or it was like tossed out, you know? I know it stings, but I think that's what happens when you are actively trying to fight sin in your world. You know, it hurts, right? You know, nowadays, right, I try to practice that perspective, you know, as I move on into my true adult stage of life, right? I'm not a little boy anymore, like I told you, right? I'm past high school. I'm past college. I just got engaged, right? And now I'm preparing for like the literal rest of my life now, right? And when I think about my friends, my family, this church, the only thing I can think about these days is trying to learn how to love you all in a better way, right? Maybe instead of loving only because I'm happy, I'm in a good mood, and people love me back, maybe I have to learn to love whether or not people love me back, right? Maybe I need to learn how to love people even when those same people are hurting me too, actively, right? You know, not out of like pity or pettiness or whatever, but true, genuine love, right? Maybe I need to learn to love just because it's simply the right thing to do, right? You know, and if you ask me, right, I can't promise you all that I'll be perfect, right? I can't promise you that I'm going to do it right all the time. I may be a leader, but that doesn't mean that I'm any better of a person too. I make mistakes too, and I hurt people too, you know, but I can promise you all that while I'm here, I will try my best. And today I want to encourage you all to do that same thing, to try your best, you know. So, you know, the people in this room right now, maybe you might be hurting right now. Maybe you have something that you brought with you that, you know, it stings a little bit, you know. And I understand that, right? But, you know, I want to encourage you this morning and simply tell you that salt is meant to sting, right? You know, I hope that you don't let the pains of community, of being in community, being in family, being in all these places, I hope that doesn't stop you from being the light, being the healing, being the growth that the Lord wants to use you as today, you know. I want to remind you today that you are exactly where you're supposed to be. You know, you might not think like that right now. I get it, right? You might not feel like that right now, but I promise you, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. You know, so I want to tell you guys, I want to encourage you guys today to don't be afraid to love with an open hand. Don't be afraid to love with an open heart. You know, because that is exactly the way Jesus loved each and every one of you.